My name is Andrea Goodkin, and I'm an Executive Vice President with Hub's Human Resources Consulting Services practice. And I'm really excited to be with you this afternoon as we close out this virtual summit with the forward-looking perspective of the business transformation that's taken place as a result of the coronavirus crisis. And we'll be looking at reimagining the workforce of the future through engagement, learning, performance, recruiting, technology, and what comes next. And we're going to dive straight into engagement and go one step further into culture. In an organization's culture, it's behaviors at scale. It's what the organization says and does. And it's during times of crisis that this really gets put to the test. And the foundation of culture is really a business's purpose and its values. And some of the values that are exhibited by high-performing cultures include things like agility, accountability, ambition, collaboration, innovation, integrity, and people centricity. Culture is really a business's internal compass, and it guides us through these times of crisis. So it's rough out there. We know that. SHRM's telling us that 2 in 3 employers report that maintaining employee morale has been a challenge. It cannot be shocking for anyone. But there's a difference between employee, say, satisfaction and employee engagement. Employee satisfaction is the extent to which an individual enjoys their job. A satisfied employee might handle their job responsibilities decently, but they might not ever go above and beyond. And this is really the key differentiator between satisfaction and engagement. An engaged employee is keenly attached emotionally to the organization, shows up every day, gives 100%, and is highly motivated to help the organization to achieve its goals going forward. So what's fascinating today is that we're seeing employee engagement actually increasing. And Josh Bersin, through his body of research, is telling us that businesses believe that their cultures have improved, that employee engagement has gone up, and the businesses are believing that the employee experience overall is better. Well, why is this happening? Well, there's some significant transformations underway. The first is that companies are really putting workers first. They're putting out flexible benefits, offering free wellness and education programs, encouraging employees to take vacation, improving work at home programs, helping furloughed and laid off workers to reemploy and find new work. There's an increased focus on personal resourcefulness and well-being. Let's face it, being thrown into this whole work at home arrangement applies a significant level of social isolation, time management issues, and overall stress on our workforce. But businesses have been stepping up in an amazing way to help workers through this. They're providing online resources, online yoga and cooking classes, implementing technology resources to help us to communicate well with our peers and our colleagues and our managers. Through Hub, just an example, we have an employee resource group called Hub Women Network, and it's a group that meets on a regular basis. Individuals from all across North America, we come together and talk about different issues and support and challenges and things that are going on. And over the last couple of months, this group has really expanded its presence. Businesses are also really expanding their use of employee surveys, techniques to gather feedback, pulse surveys. So the point being is that businesses are really engaging the workforce to understand what's working, what's not working, and what are some of those things that we need. Another significant transformation is around expanded learning. So certainly, classroom style learning is out the door right now, but online education is skyrocketing. Employees want to learn. They want to learn about the virus. They want to learn about what's going on with the employer. They want to learn about what's going on with their job. How can they be relevant in their role today, and more importantly, in their role in the reimagined workforce? Leadership culture is evolving. Our top leaders are really stepping up right now. This is likely one of the greatest learning experiences of our lives, and leaders and HR leaders are learning about people and business and the economy, and learning how to be more resilient and how to create more resilient cultures and organizations now and in the future, and so that they can be sustainable. And honestly, working remotely, a lot of aspects of working remotely are working well. We're finding that, flexible work really gives people feelings of productivity and empowerment and focus. And one thing that we're really going to want to make sure that we do is educate our workforce on resiliency. And there's two different kinds of resiliency. There's individual resilience and organizational resilience. And individuals in general are pretty adaptable. Organizations, not so much. But that's evolving in this space that we're in right now. And it's because we're learning and finding that when we give employees tools and the right culture and time, that they can do great things. And that's what's happening right now, is they're genuinely helping to transform the organization. One other area that of significant transformation are the new and refocused investment in HR and talent programs. Again, right now we know budgets and things are being reshaped far and wide. The work that the human resources programs have had to go through in the short term and in our reimagined future are extremely valuable. Reshaping our onboarding programs, recruitment, which we'll talk about in a moment, has been literally turned on its ear. Learning and development, performance, these are all programs within that HR spectrum that have undergone significant transformations now and in the future. So let's talk a little bit more about this revolution in leadership. Leaders really have to connect with, understand, and support employees like they never have before. And it's really interesting because we're seeing our leaders step out, be more vulnerable, talk about some of their personal situations and their own, challenges. And there's this new expectation and experience of humanity, listening, and support and connection. And leaders who are exhibiting some of these qualities are gaining more employee trust and loyalty, which we all know really has to be earned. Leaders are taking hold of what's working today and integrating those things quickly. This is not a wait and see what happens experience. And so we are seeing leaders really understand what's happening today and work to create those resilient and sustaining organizations in the future. We have to understand that traditional hierarchy is gone. Those frontline managers are out there facilitating the flow of information across the organization. They're doing this by eliminating barriers, putting in infrastructure, and putting in infrastructure so that decision-making can be pushed out and down. And we're doing this so that employees can really focus on the business priorities of the future. Because remember, that engaged workforce, they want to know, how can I help? How can I contribute? So the net here is that trust in leaders has increased. Organizations believe that senior leaders have responded well, and there's evidence that's showing that senior leaders have demonstrated this genuine interest in employee well-being and safety, and employees are trusting and have confidence of what's being done. So let's move on and talk about learning. So one thing we know, employees are anxious. They're very anxious. Less than 4 in 10 feel confident that they'll be able to continue to meet the requirements of their job successfully. I mean, that's kind of a heartbreaking statistic. We also know that in times of crisis like this, training budgets get slashed, and we really encourage businesses not to do that, and consider some of these alternative strategies to investing in employee development during and after this crisis. So we should be offering ongoing support and coaching. We already know that employees do better work when they receive feedback. It's so much more important now. And the feedback that we need to be providing our employees is even different. There's a greater need for emotional support and coaching and feedback. And we're really looking to our managers and leaders to be more like a coach as opposed to a boss right now. We need to, of course, emphasize critical skills. Critical skills will be very important in the future. But we also need to really focus on those behavioral skills. Gallup has done a lot of work in this space, and it's their belief that in the reimagined workforce of the future, that where we'll experience our skills gaps are not as much on the critical side, but on the behavioral skills side. And some of those some of those behavioral skills that they anticipate will really be wanting to focus on around building relationships and leading change, inspiring others, thinking critically, communicating clearly, and creating accountability. We want to be creating a virtual network of learners. We should be developing blended approaches to training because we know that's the most effective. We also want to be encouraging peer-to-peer learning in this moment in time. There's so much happening across our teams with this virtual environment is really inspiring more collaboration from a team perspective. And this genuinely is the time to really press upon that peer-to-peer learning. This certainly requires adequate technology in order to make this happen. But it's worth it. And it also really contributes and helps to create a culture of feedback. So we also really want to reassess our employee development strategy at this point. Keep investing in employee learning and development and curate these balanced programs that are going to motivate and inspire our employees today and in the future. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of online learning. The online learning marketplace is highly adaptable. Whenever there's anything that goes on, either a shift, either technology or social shifts, this online marketplace just really springs to action. And so just some history around here. It really came into being background in 1998, and in the early 2000s, it was all about putting corporate universities online. We saw organizations like SkillPath emerge. And then we moved into the Google and YouTube and iPhone, and this is where video learning really came into play. And then we found we had too much content, and we had these true content delivery systems came in like Percipio and Cornerstone. And now we've moved into this era of virtual reality, which is this on-demand access to real-world scenarios. And what's great about this is, as an employer, you're able to really access data around the impact of these learnings. But really today, it's more around these integrated platforms. You know, what we don't want are these big yard sales of learning. Employees and businesses, they want a place to go, a single place to go where they can get all of their learning in an environment that's coordinated and makes sense. So again, this is the greatest learning opportunity ever. And, you know, we're all learning. We're learning about viruses and pandemics and how to work from home. We're learning how to adapt and evolve our businesses in this new world where quality and safety and trust really have become our core values. So, you know, we encourage you to open your learning experience at work and offer lots of content on the topics that really matter, and listen to your employees, because learning is really all about individuals exploring and discovering and sharing new ideas. And we absolutely have that opportunity in the environment today and where we're going. So let's move on and talk about performance. Again, one thing we know is that collective thinking is here. Teamwork, team performance is truly accelerating. 96% of people who rate their company positively believe they're being treated well and fairly by their peers. Our peer-to-peer network is just incredibly important. And teams today are coming together more than ever to listen, talk to one another, work together on projects. People are helping each other like never before. We moved from this space where we were in an office and seeing each other every day, and now that we don't see one another every day, we're connecting more than we ever have in the past. Relationships are genuinely a priority. So kind of the days of being the first one in the office and the last one to leave are clearly over. this crisis has really just shoved home and work under the same roof for a lot of families. And this struggle to manage it all, for the first time, it's really visible to not only our peers, but also our managers and our bosses. And in the post-COVID world, performance is really going to be measured on what gets done and the value of our work. And so it's really fascinating to see this transformation while we have this workforce that's struggling in this new structure and have these different methods and methodologies of doing work that are being pressed upon us. We are finding a way to understand what that value is. And again, performance is being measured by what gets done, on what gets done and the value of that work. And because of this, it's really imperative that leaders provide a ton of clarity and around outcome-driven expectations. Again, that engaged worker wants to know what's expected in terms of work output now and in the future. Employee motivation, we're really going to be motivated by modeling. It's going to be really critical that the performance expectations are modeled and that we have measurements so that we know when we're achieving those milestones. Again, employees want to be relevant in their jobs today and in the future. Performance metrics have to be utterly clear, and we really need to level set these expectations and connect as never before. We need to connect these with the overall priorities and goals of the organization. I want to spend a minute and talk a little bit about some potential pitfalls and things to be wary of. And I want to talk a little bit about this concept of the ideal worker syndrome. And the ideal worker syndrome is that concept that a worker is engaged in their job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for their entire career. And this, there are some industries that that kind of working may be the norm. You think about legal or finance, and individuals in those environments are compensated appropriately for that kind of work. But in general, that ideal worker syndrome can have some pitfalls. And what we're finding is that in this experience that we're in right now, we're having this tendency, a lot of it because technology makes it possible, we are having this tendency to impose this expectation across the broader workforce of this kind of 24/7 type of environment. A significant part of this challenge is that this ideal worker syndrome assumes that there's full-time caretaking at home. And what we also know is that 60% of American families are headed by single parents or two working parents. And so this whole concept that it would even be conceivable to be on 24 hours a day is really a challenge. But as I said, we're finding ourselves imposing these expectations even on these critical frontline workers that are a lot of whom are in lower paying jobs, clerks, delivery drivers, warehouse workers, and the pressure of this of imposing these expectations is pretty intense. And so we need to be careful that we don't have those same expectations across all workers. We need to be careful that we're not responding punitively to requests for flexibility. Now and in the future, we'll continue to have needs expressed around caregiving at home, specific requests for flexibility. And a lot of times in the past, that has been met with negativity. We have no idea what the traditional workday is now. So we need to be thoughtful about and wary about rewarding the faster response over the better response, or rewarding the longer workday over a more productive workday, because all of this is in flux. And again, as we're in this very strange sand shifting environment, we need to be really aware of how we are, what the expectations that we're imposing broadly across the workforce because of the situation that we find ourselves in. So overall, if we take this remote work experience and we look at what are some of the investments we have today and what do we want to see in the future, here are some things to just point out. We should be looking for a positive impact on remuneration systems. Like I was just talking about, how we're looking at the jobs and the output. What does productive work output look like, and how do we remunerate that? Insights into HR opportunities, again, onboarding, recruiting, learning and development performance, all of these programs are being rehabbed as we move forward. We're creating these flexible and agile operating models. Our corporate culture is more connected internally and externally and needs to continue with that connectedness. We have this opportunity with all of this collaboration that we're experiencing right now to really take away valuable data. And we do this by having some specific methods to do that. And of course, aligning our business goals for this new cultural standard in the future that really circles around quality, safety, and trust. So I've mentioned recruiting a couple of times. Let's talk about recruiting. So I love this. Back in October of 2019, LinkedIn did a big piece. I call it the recruiting premonitions from October 2019. And this is what they said back in the fall, that the demand for recruiters had grown 63% since 2016. Recruiters are taking on more of an advisory role. So within organizations, they're more business-focused advisory. 1 in 3 recruiting heads comes out of business development, operations, and sales, not necessarily human resources or talent acquisition. Recruiters are going to use more metrics to track actions and outcomes. They're going to need new skills. The investment in technology is going to continue to increase. And remember, this is from last fall. The #1 priority for recruiting organizations during the next 5 years would be keeping pace with rapidly changing hiring needs. Well, this is all just extremely poetic with where we are right now, because this is what our recruiting organizations are facing today. Everything has radically changed. And we're going to have to really pay some attention to what's happening on the recruiting side of the world. Some things to note. There is going to clearly be a demand for highly skilled remote workers. This is going to increase. How are we going to address that? We know that some companies are holding back. They're not hiring. They're not doing anything right now, while others are literally hiring en masse. One of the things that this a significant transformation that we really need to be thinking about sooner than later is the type of recruiting that our recruiters are going to be experiencing. They will be facing, and this was similar to what we experienced in 2008 and 9, they'll be experiencing extraordinarily high number of applicants for every open requisition. And a big part of the challenge will be simply managing the volume of applicants that come in for every rec and sorting through. And the range of qualifications of those applicants is going to be extremely broad. And so technology is going to have to keep up with that. We have to look at our applicant tracking systems. How are we going to manage the volume that we're about to see of candidate and applicant flow? Preparedness for hiring managers and candidates. It's going to be so important that we don't just, shoot out a Zoom link to a hiring manager and a candidate and tell them to have at it. We're really going to need to help provide them some training and education and coaching so we can help our candidates to have a good experience through these processes that we're going to be getting into. We anticipate that recruitment will be done largely through internal teams, certainly using external recruiting for niche jobs and things like that. And the one tactical thing that I'm going to point out is please revamp your job specifications, things that we really need to be thinking about. We're going to have to be communicating to our candidates around expectations around travel. Will they be working in an office or will they be working from home? What does that look like? If the expectations are that they're going to be working in an office, candidates are going to want to know what are the social distancing protocols, what are the cleanliness protocols, and this is also where that extreme flexibility is going to come into play, because we're going to have candidates out there that simply are not going to be able to come into the workforce. Maybe it's around childcare, maybe they're immunocompromised and simply, until things change, can't come into the workforce. And this is the other part of it is we know that this is going to change over time. And this is where we simply we need to be prepared for these fluctuations. All right, let's move into technology. What do we know today? We know that touching things and breathing the air in an enclosed space, these are things that can be challenging. And we used to be in a world where we found comfort being in the presence of others, but now we're finding comfort being in the absence of others. And we used to ask ourselves a question: if we wanted to meet with a group of people or have a conversation, we'd ask ourselves, is there a reason to do this online? Meaning we really should be meeting in person. Well, now it's going to be the opposite. We're going to be asking ourselves, is there any good reason to do this in person? So I want to talk a little bit about densification. So densification is a term that has to do with packing more people in a smaller space. And it was back around 2016 that this whole concept kind of really came forward. And this was when businesses were transforming office spaces to get more workers in smaller spaces. And they transformed this into what were kind of these cool open office layouts where the private offices were eliminated and there were areas set up for private conversations or phone rooms or places for food. But the general concept was to get as many people in these open spaces as possible. Well, densification is out. De-densification is certainly, the place that we're moving toward. And in order for us to do that, we know that information technology is absolutely going to have to be at the top of their game. IT is going to become more necessary than ever as remote work brings these new challenges regarding security and support capabilities. Employees are going to really need strong IT staff to support both the in and out of office employees. We're going to need new policies that will need to be written, maintained as infrastructure changes, and IT in collaboration with business operations. They're also going to be tasked with creating and finding tools that gather metrics around how we're working remotely. So here are just some kind of broader questions that we need to be asking ourselves around technology. And is our technology going to help or hinder us? So we need to ask, how do we remain or actually get ourselves on the cutting edge of remote working? Because we certainly threw it all together and we've talked about some areas where it's working, but how now we're going to have this competition to be out in front of it. Can we increase productivity and also prepare for future disruption? We anticipate that there will be future disruption, that the course of the virus is going to change, and we don't know where or how geographically, time-wise, but we have to be thinking about that in our future. And what are we doing around technology as we anticipate that? Do we invest more in remote technology or do we expand what's already in place? Brings up opportunities around artificial intelligence and how can we be more digitized around recruiting and onboarding. This is also a good time to look at the systems we have in place. Are we looking at negotiating different packages, or is it time to make a vendor change altogether? So I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about what comes next. And when we think about reimagining the workforce of the future, we've already talked about some key components: engagement, culture, learning, development, recruiting. I want to give some honorable mention to some of these other components that will be really critical to pay attention to. Of course, just straight up workforce planning. What's the composition of our workforce in the future? How many employees are we going to need? When? How? Contractors, vendors? All of this needs to be reassessed. Our future skills requirements, we talked about that a little earlier. We need to really take a look at, with our rehabbed jobs, what are these skills requirements of the future, keeping in mind that we already know that there's some of those behavioral skills, we anticipate some skills gaps there. What is our people strategy? let's talk for a second about compensation. This is compensation is an area that's really going to continue to evolve. You know, our colleagues who are out there managing compensation data and the market data that's always been and will continue to be incredibly important to us as we look at pay equity and other types of issues there. They're still sorting out what that's going to look like as we have businesses making across the board adjustments and changes. And so we really are going to need to keep our eye on the compensation landscape as we move forward and as that data evolves with us. Succession planning, so important to take a look at our succession plans. We've been so incredibly busy and focused on what's been going on and making these changes and getting to where we are today. Please be sure that you're incorporating a review of your succession planning as you get into your transformed environment. And then around workforce reductions, what's happening with those individuals who've been furloughed, laid off? What are we doing with that population? And what are things that we can really learn and take away from that whole workforce reduction? So I really want to thank you for your time this afternoon, your time with me, your time over the course of the summit. And I wish you all absolutely the best of luck as you journey forward into your reimagined workforces of the future.